last 2.5 weeks. Today's the day that we can go over it, clarify things, and talk over everything that we've learned or whatever you have specific questions about. Okay? So learning history. Learning history as a definition is just the sum total of everything you've learned in your life. Okay? So if you looked at an individual and could go back to the very beginning when they started to learn and could see every individual piece of learning they did, that would all make up their learning history. And so what we're going to do today is go through how that learning history then affects the way that we act, the way we think, what we learn, how successful we are, lots of aspects of life. But there's a specific instance that is really a good example of how learning history can affect our behavior, even from a very young part of our childhood. Okay, so the A not B error. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say the A not B error? Big thing in child development, but anybody taking child development of this yet knows what this is?
Oh, I don't know what
not
it
sure?
is. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You just
Okay.
asked if I was being shy.
Yeah. Good job. Okay. So here's an example of the child doing the A not B task. The task itself was come up with by Piaget, and he had some explanations for why it happened. But I'm just going to show you the video, and you see what happens as the child tries to set up a little bit of what they're going to do. He's got a toy, and the person that's on the other side of him is going to put it in into this side of this apparatus. Okay, so there's a hole, and then they cover it up. This is the A side, and this is the B side. So you're going to see the person put it in A 3 times in a row, and then let the child look for it. And the child's going to go to A. Then, the A not B, where they switch it, you'll see that the worker puts it in the B side, and the child will reach for it in A, even though the worker shows the child that they're putting it in B. So watch for that, and then we'll break it down a little bit.
Thank you. Here's mine.
Why does the baby see it go to B, but then look for it at A? And this is really consistent. And the interesting thing about it is that kids do it when they're 10 months old and younger, but as soon as they're 12 months old, they stop doing it. So Piaget said that 12-month-old babies have developed this thing he called object permanence. They're able to kind of have a schema for where that is and what it is and where it went and keep that in their head. Okay? And so they recognize that even though it's gone from their view, it still exists, it's still there, and they are able to track from A to B when they're 12 months old. Okay? So that's Piaget's explanation, and that lasted for probably 30 or 40 years. Then some of the brain research that we've talked about came out, and they said, well, that's probably not a bad concept, but older babies, according to neuropsychologists, have also started to develop this prefrontal cortex. They're able to make decisions, and their brains are working better. And so because of that brain development, that's why they don't make the error when they're 12 months old, and they do when they're 10 months old. It's all brain development. Okay? And there's a couple of researchers, Esther Thalen and Linda Smith. They said, yes, that's all true, but there's some other things too. They have improved memory use by the time they're 12 months old. They've improved spatial awareness. They're better at where things are in space. They have improved motor skills. Okay? And the big idea that they've focused on is that this development, or anything that we learn, and development in that way as well, is a dynamic system. There's lots of pieces working together to bring about this change or this new way of being able to think as a 12-month-old baby. But then the most interesting thing to me for Thalen and Smith was that they started to look at this A not B error, and they tried to break it down into pieces and say, okay, so what is actually happening and what's actually causing this error to occur? Okay? not B error, for one thing, was time dependent. If they had more time in between the showing it in A, like if they showed it in A and then waited longer, and then showed it in A and then waited longer, and then showed it in B, the 10-month-old went right to B. Okay, so that was one thing. The amount of time that elapsed in between the seeing it go in A made a difference on whether or not the child made the error at 10 months old. Okay? And then the most interesting thing was really cool that they could make it disappear. Like they could make a 10-month-old do it and then not do it based on the way they interacted with the child and things that they did. So there are 3 things that they did that could make the A not B error come and go. First was posture. So if they showed the baby A, and then while the baby was sitting down like that baby was, then if they stood the baby up and then showed it B, they went to B instead of A. And so you see the difference? With the normal way of doing the A not B error, they keep them in the same posture. And then the child makes the error more often than not. Okay? Changing the posture, either way, switching it. Like if they were standing while they were seeing it in A, and then moved them to sitting, then they would find it in the right place instead of making the error. Okay? Another thing they could do was to put weights on the hands of the baby. So if they did the A, and then put weights on, and then showed them B, it took the error away in that way too. So it changed things up enough that they then looked at B again. And it's also, I haven't read the original research, it's also possible that they had weights on the hand the whole time so that it was harder for them to go to A. Their hypothesis and idea was that because of that added time that it would take and the added thought and work of having to lift their arms with the weights on them, it slowed the process down enough that they then didn't make the error. So it gave their brain time to think. And then another thing they could do is if they really made it attention grabbing. So if they really made a big deal of, look, I'm putting it in B, and then did it, then the error went away. So all of those things in terms of what Piaget and the neuropsychologists would say shouldn't make a difference. Okay? If the prefrontal cortex isn't developed, they shouldn't be able to do this. If they don't have object permanence, they shouldn't be able to do this no matter what you do as far as whether they're standing or sitting or have weights on their hands or whatever. Okay? So that was the interesting thing about this experiment. Okay? So why does this help make the babies make the right choice? That's the question for learning history. Okay? One, development is a dynamic system where humans have lots of different things working on them, and that all those pieces matter for how we act and what we're going to turn out like. Okay? All of those pieces then grow through our interaction with our environment, other people, experiences, and whatever we learn along the way then guides us to the way that we act in the future, okay? Becoming some great scientist. Right? The gas to turn into a cloud. Okay? What else has to be right to make it rain? Humidity is going to be a factor of it. Yep. Okay. Air pressure makes a big difference. Okay? If the air pressure is slightly different, some days it's just cloudy and some days it rains, and it's the air pressure is one factor in that. Okay? The amount of water in the clouds makes a difference, obviously. Temperature, right? Like if it's a certain temperature, then it changes what's going to happen. So all of those are causes for rain. You couldn't say that one of them, the air pressure, is the overall causal factor. There is no one causal factor. It's a system. It's all working together, and as it does, we get the phenomenon of rain. Okay? How a baby learns to walk is another example of, there's lots of different factors. I'm not going to get into that. And this also leads to the idea of circular causality. And this is the idea that everything you do now has been predicated by things that happened in the past. So a good example of this is to go back to the expectancy times value. This theory is present. Okay? So when you're looking at the expectancy times value theory, you are saying, how is a person going to act right now? If you look at their expectancy for success and how much they value the outcome, you can say how they're going to act right now. The problem with that is it doesn't take into account any of this past. And you've got a big chunk of past experiences that guide your expectancy, right? So if you expect to be successful, usually it's because you've been successful in the past with it, right? Like if you're expecting to be successful in school, it's probably because you've had success in the past. And value would be the same thing. So the idea with circular causality is that anything that you're choosing now is more, rather than like a constant going forward, it's more of a cycle where you're going back over the same things again and again and again and experiencing the same type of thing and reacting in pretty similar ways. And so whatever you experience in the past is going to affect the way you act in the future or in the present. So we can learn from our mistakes. Not a guarantee, right? Like you're not going to necessarily learn from your mistakes, but it is a possibility because of learning histories. Rob?
What worked the last time? Say you're in the same situation, you did well on this test because you did these things, you do the same thing again, you might do that as well on this test.
So it may bring good habits, especially when they're rewarded. And when you find good results with it, then it helps. Any other thoughts? One of the best things about a learning history is the efficiency that it gives us. Like if we have become habitual about things that just work for us, then it becomes easier and easier and easier to do that activity or that behavior. And so it makes us very efficient in terms of how much space we have to use in our brains to do that thing. So a term that we'll go into more later in the semester is automaticity. Anything that you keep doing over and over and get good at, then becomes more automatic. And what are some examples of things that you're getting automatic at, or that you are pretty automatic at now, at your age?
Tying your shoes.
Tying your shoes. You don't have to think about that much, do you? Okay? What else?
Mechanics of driving.
Driving. Do you remember what it's like to start driving as a 15, 16-year-old? And how much attention you have to have, and how much of your brain has to be focused on every little detail of driving? Okay? You've got a very small learning history when you're starting. Okay? You have no experience, or very little. But as you experience more and more and more, then you become more and more efficient at it, and that's a helpful thing. It makes us be able to do things much less, with a lot less cognitive load. Okay? Now, what about bad things? What could a learning history do that would then lead to problems? Be maladaptive. Those good things we would call adaptive. Anything that would be harmful would be maladaptive. What are some things that you could learn in your past that then would cause problems for you later?
Like maybe if you saw your parents drinking to deal with problems or whatever, then you would do the same things with your issues as well.
Yeah, if that's just kind of what you see, then it's part of your learning history. You may follow that because of what you've seen. Okay, good. We got any athletes in here? Have you ever had a coach tell you you're doing something wrong? You've formed bad habits, and they say, no, that is not the right way to do this. And so what are some of the things? Joe, I saw you shaking or nodding your head. So have any memories of?
I mean, I learned a lot of stuff on every day now. I see stuff that I learned wrong in high school that in college it's getting and it's stuff that I've been practicing with every day for 4 years now. So it's stuff that I really engraved into my brain that it's right and it's actually not the right technique. So it's hard for me to break those habits.
Perfect.
And start new habits.
Yeah, which is exactly the point that I want to make with learning histories. They help us, but if you've got a bad habit or something that's not going well, it's really hard to break. For why a student hits another student during recess. And I want you to do it based on a made-up learning history. So imagine to yourself what could lead to this behavior. Okay? Instead of looking at it as one thing, look at it from a multi-causal point of view and a learning history point of view, and just discuss it with your neighbor for now, and see what you can come up with. Come up with at least one scenario that would explain why this would happen. Okay? So, go ahead.
Yeah, by just hitting each other all the time, and then all the time people like, oh, you're mad. He's like, oh,
Okay, now go a little farther, because everybody that's got a sibling has seen this, but that doesn't mean everybody that hits at school. So what could then go beyond just they've probably fought with their siblings? What would have to also happen to make it more likely that this would happen? Think about that. Could be an aggressive nature, like you could say it's a temperament issue, but that's a pretty entity kind of thing. Like this is the way they are, and there's nothing we can do about it. So, as an educator, we don't want to take that point of view just because it kind of makes us lose hope. It's like, well, it's just the way they are. So, what else could explain it? That maybe something. I mean, after that, he seems acceptable. No repercussions. At home, right? Like that could happen. Right. So when my kids hit each other, they have some kind of consequence. Okay, that's not right. Let's be nice. Let's talk to each other. Something to try and show them that that's not the way we want you to solve the problem. But if they've never had that and it's worked, then you can see how it can be. Okay. Good example.
say like the student that hits the other kid like has a bunch of siblings and all they do is like fight and push like when they feel angry, when they just playing around, so that's all they used to do is hitting someone else.
Okay, so that could get it started, but like that's the same thing. Did almost everybody jump to siblings and fighting? Okay? That's a pretty common explanation. I know it happened in my house. But it's also, like, I never hit anybody at school either. I hit my sister, and got hit by my brother and sister, and all sorts of stuff at home, but I never hit anybody at school. So it's a good start, but I think we need more to explain why someone would hit at school. So we have to dig more into a history than just to say they probably hit at home and it's acceptable.
I think it depends on the age, too, because we were talking about how if they're young, they don't know how to express their words, their feelings in words, so they just choose to hit or whatever reason. It's just the way that works for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So age would make a big difference in terms of this type of behavior. Actually pretty normal for kindergarten, first grade, right? Like if you're working with that age group, you would expect this. Whereas in high school, you'd probably be talking detention or suspension for something like this. So age definitely plays a role in it.
We said like violent video games.
Okay.
It's like an action might be okay in a video game when it's not in schools and with other people.
Yeah, huge debate there, right? Like that's probably never going to go away because they say, oh yeah, it's got to make some difference, but then other people say, no, we've done the research and don't see anything different about these kids that play the violent video games. But it's definitely something that could be one of those factors. And that gets back to the multi-causal idea, right? Like it wouldn't be just that, because there's lots of kids that play violent video games that don't do anything like this. But remember, there's lots of factors pushing on behavior, not just one. So that's not going to cause it, but it may be a tipping point to get things over the edge.
Say like the student that hits the other kid like has a bunch of siblings and all they do is like fight and push like when they feel angry, when they just playing around, so that's all they used to do is hitting someone else.
Okay, so that could get it started, but like that's the same thing. Did almost everybody jump to siblings and fighting? Okay? That's a pretty common explanation. I know it happened in my house. But it's also, like I never hit anybody at school either. I hit my sister, and got hit by my brother and sister, and all sorts of stuff at home, but I never hit anybody at school. So it's a good start, but I think we need more to explain why someone would hit at school. So we have to dig more into a history than just to say they probably hit hit at home and it's acceptable?
I think it depends on the age too, because we were talking about how if they're young, you know, they don't know how to express their words, their
Good.
feelings in words, so they just choose to hit for whatever reason. It's just the way that works for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So age would make a big difference in terms of this type of behavior. Pretty normal for kindergarten, first grade, right? Like if you're working with that age group, you would expect this. Whereas in high school, you'd probably be talking detention or suspension for something like this. So age definitely plays a role in it.
We said like violent video games.
Okay.
It's like an action might be okay in a video game when it's not in schools and with other people.
Yeah, huge debate there, right? Like it's probably never going to go away because they say, oh yeah, it's got to make some difference, but then other people say, no, we've done the research and don't see anything different about these kids that play the violent video games. But it's definitely something that could be one of those factors. Like, and that gets back to the multi-causal idea, right? Like it wouldn't be just that, because there's lots of kids that play violent video games that don't do anything like this. But remember, there's lots of factors pushing on behavior, not just one. So that's not going to cause it, but it may be a tipping point to get things over the edge.